Did you see? Can he see the There's like a little
Yes,
camera on
he's
there.
all set, Scott. Thank you. We're all set. So, welcome to Cornerstone Home Inspection Education Center. Tonight we have Jack Branco from Absolute Tank. He's going to be talking about oil tanks, what to look for, what not to look for, and we're going to hang it off. We're going to hand it off to him. Go ahead, Jack.
All right, so don't worry about the camera. We're just gonna. Sorry about the camera issue, but a little thing about us. What we do is we remove and install oil tanks. A lot of times when you guys go out in the field, you need to look for certain things. So basically, what I suggest to you guys is like this right here is a brand new tank. If you guys go out there, the only thing I would suggest is painting the legs. The legs are a little rusty now. Sometimes you guys always want to edge on the side of caution with this type of stuff. You don't want to always say it's fine unless it's brand new. Now, a lot of these tanks, you'll see dates on the top of them or on the side. You could just note in your notes the date, and there's no appeared leaks. Nothing's leaking, and in this situation, I would recommend, replacing, painting the legs. Next clip.
So, Jack, I'll step in here for a second, and I may cut in from time to time. One of the things we have to do now is through the Department of Consumer Protection, they want us to incorporate our standards into these presentations. So let's just review these. The inspection requirements. The Connecticut Department of Consumer Protection mandates that home inspectors evaluate, report on the condition, visible components of heating systems, including oil tanks, as part of the standard home inspections. Inspectors must identify the energy source, energy type of heating system, and know any evidence of significant deficiencies in the accessible components. When we talk about the scope of the duties, the regulations outline the specific responsibilities of home inspection regarding heating systems and oil tanks. The regulation requires a visual examination, installed heating equipment, and associated vent systems, flues, and chimneys. We have a documentation standard. The report must include clear descriptions of observed defects with recommendations for correction or further evaluation by qualified professionals when necessary. We want photographic evidence is highly recommended. Required documentation. In your reports, you must describe the energy source, the heating method for each area of the home, along with reporting the location, material, condition of the oil tank if visible. Any evidence of leak, damage, or improper installation must be documented. And then professional limitations. We're not required to evaluate other underground oil tanks, or provide specialized tests. When limitations for visual inspection exist, these constraints must be clearly documented in the inspection report. That's clear on everything. If you can't inspect something, you need to put it in there because that will come back and bite you. Exclusions and limitations. The regulation explicitly states that home inspectors are not required to inspect underground fuel storage tanks to determine the interior condition or inaccessible tanks. And then you must explain that in the report. So, Jack, we put this together but feel free to, if you want to just go through some of these things and we'll continue on.
All right, yeah. So the first thing you want to do is, as far as trying to find an oil tank, first thing you want to do is ask the homeowner where their heating source is, what they're using, propane, gas. In this situation, we'll stick to oil tanks. If they say the oil tank's located in the basement, then that's when you go down, do your visual inspection. If, let's just say the house was switched to gas, you go into that basement, the first thing you want to do is walk around the perimeter of that basement and see if you see any copper lines coming through the foundation and or some type of maybe concrete patching that's done in two small areas. You can see some of it's black pipe through. 9 times out of 10, it'll be copper lines that come through the foundation. So the first thing you want to do is walk around the basement and see if you see any signs of that. If you don't see any signs of that, you need to go by the heating source. So let's just say they switched to gas. If you look around the bottom of the boiler, you might see a copper line coming through the floor. You might see some traces of maybe oil residue somewhere around the boiler where that can lead you to believe that there might be an underground tank. Then once you looked in the basement, if you found some copper lines coming through the foundation, you can walk outside. When you walk around the perimeter, you might see like a 1 inch, inch and a quarter, inch and a half, and maybe a 2 inch piece of steel pipe up along the foundation somewhere around in the vicinity of where you found them oil lines inside. And that's what'll let you to believe there is an oil tank in the ground. And then you can have them say further investigation is definitely needed in that area. And then a company like mine, we would go out with a 2-box magnetometer. We would scan the area in which we see the oil lines in that vent. If there's a metal mass in the ground, we would mark it out and have the customer remove it.
I'm just gonna break in here for a bit. Our presentation shows the types of oil tanks. We have, like Jack said, indoor tanks, typically 275 gallons, outdoor above ground tanks, underground storage tanks, and here's some signs of aging and deterioration. We've talked about the reporting requirements for inspectors. Record specific sizing, anywhere from 275 to 330, the location, describe the visual conditions, including visual evidence, again, with the photographs, use proper lighting. So we'll go on there. Let's see. If you're watching this as a recorded event, you have to write down this viewing code, OT7483. This must be presented when asking for a certificate. Jack, can you talk about cleanup responsibilities for homeowners?
Okay, so if the homeowner decides to reside in that home, I get plenty of customers that say, we'll go out there, we'll pull the oil tank out, and the tank is leaking. What the first thing we'll do is we'll hand that soil sample off to the lab. The state of Connecticut allows you 500 parts per million of oil in the soil. Anything above 500 parts per million, the existing homeowner has to clean it up before the property transfers hands. If they intend on dying in the home, so could that contamination. So whoever inherits that would inherit an issue. But that soil sample that we get that deems it leaking would also be handed into the deep as well. So that site is marked that there is contamination at X location on the property.
And so, as you can see here, I'm sorry, Jack, to interrupt you, but as you can see here, if you're reading this, the legal obligations of the Connecticut law places strict liability on the property owners for all oil contamination, and homeowners must report any known or suspected release to the Connecticut Department of DEP.
Are you guys mandated spill response? Like you have to say something to the deep if you guys, let's say you go and inspect the tank. Are these guys required to call the deep?
No,
if that tank is leaking?
Inspector, no.
Okay.
Jack, just one thing real quick, and I know you're going to talk about buried oil tanks in that process. Can you, can you kind of let some of these guys know how you can tell? I mean, obviously you can look at some tanks, they're in pretty good shape. Is there a way you can go in and tell the age of a tank just by some of the physical characteristics of the tanks?
First, if the tank has no handles,
there you go.
If the tank has 0 handles on either end cap of the tank, that tank is at least from the early 80s prior. Early 80s to 90s, they put like a little makeshift hoop on it. And as it progressed, they got better handling hardware for the side of the tank. But if there's no handles on the side of the tank, I would say that the tank needs to be replaced.
What about those red tanks that you see?
Red tanks are always garbage. They're the first ones to leak. But in certain situations, you guys can go in the basement, see those tanks will be mint. But 9 times out of 10, those always are the leakers. When I get a call from a homeowner saying my tank is leaking in the basement, it's always a red tank.
How old are those red tanks roughly?
Roughly, I would say 60s, 70s. Like some were put in the early 80s, but everything is prior. If that tank, if you can deem it older than, 20 years old, something needs to happen. See, the biggest problem right now in the industry is the biodiesel. The biodiesel has an additive in it to make it coagulate and burn correctly at the burner through the nozzle line. That right there, that additive is burning holes in steel tanks. That's why if you look at a lot of the projects I've been doing for the past 2 to 3 years, I recommend the Roth tank because the Roth tank has the blotter on the inside, a plastic blotter. So for layman's terms, it's like a milk carton with a soda can on the outside. Double wall protection, 30-year warranty. And right now, Roth and Granby are giving out the tanks at the same price. So Granby switched from a 10-year warranty to a 3-year warranty. So that's very important too. So if you guys go out there and you look at the label on the side and you see that tank is 8 years old, it looks great, but you could say it's past its manufacturer's warranty because Granby only does 3-year. If you see those Roth tanks, like I said, looks like a stainless steel refrigerator in the basement. Those are 30-year tanks.
Preventative maintenance to reduce risk is an annual inspection, regular monitoring. They have protection upgrades, leak detection devices. You want to make sure the filters replacement does yearly. If there's water detected near the tank, have it professionally removed. These are things that you should be telling your client when you're doing an inspection. How often do they replace the oil tank filters, Jack? Is it yearly?
Once a year. Like a lot of people have a service plan. So once a year, they will use that for they'll change filter, strainer, and nozzle. So the filter is usually under the bottom of the tank or somewhere near the boiler. The strainer is inside the pump housing, and the nozzle is inside the burner itself and the blast tube.
I'm just going to step in here with some. Jack, when you go in for a tank, do you have to do these proper documentation techniques? Photographic documentation?
Well, it's my standard, like, if my camera was working, I'd show you a diet. Like what I do is I'll go out to the job site, meet with the customer, ask them what they were thinking. Because a lot of people with Google now, which is our worst enemy, they Google everything and everybody knows everything. But either way, I'll go there. I'll kind of ask them what they're thinking. I'll go in the basement and then I'll give them my recommendation. So basically, the first thing I'll do is take pictures of the area, go back to the office. I draw a diagram up of the whole area, submit them a proposal. If that goes through, then that proposal, the diagram that I drew goes to the town hall, pull the permit. Then we, set the job up, go out there and do it. And then when they're done, they'll get a document. It's basically a closure report, especially for swap outs. Swap outs are when you pull a tank out of the basement and put a new one in, or anything above ground, I consider a swap out. Gotcha. Anything with a swap out, they'll get a basic report just saying what we did and the date we were there that did it. We tell them to keep that. The closure report for like an underground tank is a lot different.
Let me go through some of these things. How to phase conservative. So I'll step in here. When you talk to a home buyer, it's the language that you use is very important. So we want to be factual, measurable descriptions. You don't need to be emotional. If you see a tank that's leaking, there's no reason to freak out. Clear context. You have to be balanced. If a tank is looking good, there's no rust, there's no corrosion, but it's older, there's ways to present that without being an alarmist, but to cover yourself also. Here we got some pictures. Maybe Jack can comment on these.
All right. So basically what you got is standard procedure: excavate down to the top of the tank. Then you would cut a hole like you would see in that picture on the top left. Clean the tank out so it's clean steel in the ground. Then you would pull the tank out of the ground, soil sample the excavation. If there is any type of visible holes, the inspector, fire marshal, or building inspector, depending on towns, they'll look at the tank. Sometimes they ask you to roll it on its side. If there's any holes, they'll take pictures and note. I'll also take pictures and note. And then we'll sample the excavation. If we see signs of a product release, we polyline the excavation, backfill compact. You shouldn't leave an open hole. A lot of other companies, they leave an open hole and they fence it off. All that does is create a pond of water, of contaminated water, and risk of injury to anybody that's nosy, sneaks by. If the sidewalls cave in, it's just too much risk. So we polyline the excavation, backfill and compact the area, hand the sample into the lab. Then once we get the lab results back, we'll give the customer a proposal to clean it up. So the second tank is a 275. If 275s are never meant to bury, always leaking. The other one looks like some type of waste oil situation. That's definitely a leak you would definitely want to note. And the one on the right is kind of standard. Like when you guys get to some of these older homes, That's kind of standard what you'll see. So what you see on the right side of the tank is the fill pipe is leaking. It's running down the side of the tank. Sometimes the leaks happen on top in the piping, and it runs down the side of the tank, makes it look like the tank is leaking, but what it is bad piping. Me personally, our company, Absolute Tank, does not replace any piping. If the tank exhibits an age like that, I would recommend the customer to replace it. And I would also let him know on site, I don't believe the tank has a hole in it, it's leaking. I believe the oil you see below the tank is from a leaky pipe. And the bottom picture is just them. That's an ideal situation where they actually put the tank in sand, which never happens in Connecticut.
These are pictures that you sent me, Jack, the next 5 or 6, if you want to comment on them.
Yeah, so right there, that's actually my 2-box magnetometer. Was a house with no filler vent. I mean, no fill. So the customer said he thought his dad left the tank in the yard, not sure where. I went in the basement at this location. There was oil lines where that water sprinkler's coming out. I came outside, I saw the vent sitting right there next to the chimney. Then I put a rock on the ground, I painted it, and then I marked out the area. And I told them, and then what I also have is like a metal rod. I call it a smart stick, and I'll, push it down into the ground. Once I tap the top of the tank, I'll know how deep that metal mass is in the ground, so I can game plan on what needs to be done. Then I can also, just double check my metal detection. This situation, that is a 550-gallon tank, which is 48 inches in diameter and 5'5" long. This is another.
Jack, I'm sorry.
This is a 1,000-gallon tank on the beach in Westbrook. Tank was taking on water. Underneath that blue bucket's a broken pipe with a pair of shorts that were stuffed in the fill pipe. So the tank was taking on water. So we went out there. We replaced it with a tank in the basement here and excavated. This is a 1,000-gallon tank.
What's the largest buried tanks that you've come across?
That I did? The biggest one I did was in Waterbury. We did a 40,000-gallon tank. That was pretty massive.
Commercial?
Yeah. So this is a situation. This is a tandem install. So you have two 275s here. For a quick reference, so you don't have to pull out your tape measure so much. If you notice that 4 bungs are together like this, that's a 275. If you see like where it says Dominic on this tank right here, if there's like an 18-inch void from that bung to the end of the tank, usually those are 330s. So this is a situation where I recommended replacement. As you can see, the oil rags, that tank leaked. It was leaking. They put the oil rags down a while ago, and those oil rags usually turn red, but it was at the stage where it was yellow, which is an old leak. And I looked underneath there. There was, you'll see, it looks like black stalagmites hanging out. Don't ever rub it or touch it because you'll create a bigger problem than you ever want to be in. So just take a picture of it, note it. If there's a black, that what it is sludge leaking out of the hole in the tank, and it kind of solidifies and almost blocks that hole up. If you happen to take a rag and rub that off and say, hey, look, your tank's leaking, there's going to be red oil all over the place, and you're going to be wishing you didn't do that.
What causes a lot of this? I mean, obviously with age and everything, but what increases the chance of a tank leaking on, most
algae
of the time?
Algae and water, condensation, settle in the bottom of the tank, water, and the number one contributor right now is the additive and biodiesel. So this was a fun tank. This was in a crawl space, about 30 feet into a crawl space. The guy said he wanted to pour a rat slab in the basement. We ended up pouring like a 12-inch rat slab, and I had the honor of removing that tank out of there. We had to jackhammer the whole edges up, cut the tank out in pieces, and push it through a 2-foot by 2-foot door. And then that tank itself, because of the concrete and it was in contact with dirt, that tank itself was leaking. So what we had to do is we had to go in there with a super vac and suck out the contaminated soil as much as we could. And then I had to put what's called a passive venting system in there in order to treat that, emulsify that. They use the air as a emulsification process to treat the soil to get it below the state's legal limits, which I've been doing this since I've been 19. I'm 50, and I've never seen that process work, but that's what the deep wants.
So when you have that passive system in, and I see it from time to time,
you see those white candy canes sticking out by the foundation,
right?
There'll be a 4-inch PVC pipe sticking out of the foundation, and then outside to the atmosphere. Supposed to run it. Sometimes you run it up the side of the house and put a windblown turbine on it. Other times the deep will just require 2 candy canes and in and out. Candy cane meaning I put a 4-inch 90 into a 4-inch 90, so no water or anything gets in it.
Do you have you ever had a situation where because of the footings and everything that you just couldn't keep, I know you're vacuuming
Yeah, you'll
it
see
out.
that. I got some pictures coming up. But right here, this is a commercial site. Those are 3/4-inch black pipe coming through the foundation there. And they were just capped off. The guy purchased this humongous apartment complex actually in Greenwich, billion-dollar situation. And he was told there was no tanks in the ground. So I saw that coming through the foundation wall. I went outside, metal detected, and I found a 8,000-gallon tank that someone tried to make go away. Here's another situation, oil staining and wetness. This is pretty much, you can see an overfill at one time, or this piping is, you can see where the union is on the fill. So the vent pipe usually has a gauge on it, and the red piece right there, that's your vent alarm. So as oil flows through the stained wet pipe that's to your right, air gets pushed out of the tank. As it's being filled, the tank whistles. Once that whistle stops whistling, that means the oil got to the bottom of the whistle. That tells the driver outside to shut down. Tank's full. Sometimes they fall asleep. Who knows what they do? And this is where the overfill. But this is also a dissimilar metal situation. You got a galvanized 90 going into steel piping, and that's not good either.
Jack, is it correct to call out undersized vent pipes on an oil
Yes.
tank?
Well, the state went away for the first 15 years of my existence in this business. The state did away with whatever you fill the tank with, it had to be vented with. All the oil companies were coming back saying they can't hear the vents anymore because the diameter of the pipe is too big. So now they're allowing 1.5 or 2-inch piping. I just carry 2-inch dies on my truck, so I keep it old. Whatever you fill the tank, it's vented with, and I've very seldom had an issue with that.
What about copper fill?
Copper vet? Nope. That's definitely no. You don't want none. You don't want that at all. If you see a copper vent going out the house, that's totally illegal. So this
Copper
right here
fill?
is another
Can you
tank,
do
same
copper fill?
situation. What's that? Oh, you're
Can you
talking
do
about the
copper fill?
composite, the composite of the piping?
No, I actually saw a copper fill and vent, and they
Yes, that's all right. I mean, you can
fill's okay.
as long as where there's swing joints, it's not soldered. So you need swing joints. So wherever the fill goes up and out, there should be a swing joint for any type of earth settling or foundation settling or anything that could occur. You're supposed to come up with a 90 close nipple and then another 90, so it has some type of swing to the top of it, and also allows you to get better pitch without bending pipes. So copper could be used. It just I thought you were talking about copper tubing, because I've seen somebody have a piece of flexible 1/2-inch copper coming out of their tank and outside, and that was their vent. That's
I'm gonna
easy.
say it was probably it looked like 2-inch maybe, or was it 1.5
Yeah,
inch?
2-inch, that's fine. As long as there's mechanical swing joints on that, and the swing joints aren't soldered, you'll be all right.
Thank
This
you.
was another tank I found in the bushes way off the house. Customer said there was no tank there. The new homeowner bought the property. She ripped down some walls in the basement and found copper lines. I went out there, metal detected, and found this tank off the house. So that was a lawsuit. Yeah, now this is a situation, back to what you were saying about abandoning tanks. So if you look real close by that front AC unit, there is a fill pipe sitting out right there. So yes, technically I advised this particular customer to remove the AC units. Let us pull the tank out. You always want to tell the people to remove the tank out, but it's also abandonment is legal in the state of Connecticut as well, as long as there's some type of hardship. I don't really consider AC units a hardship. That's just more money. I mean, have somebody come out there, inert the freon out of those things, cut them, move them out of the way, let me do my thing, and then they can come and put them back. But this particular customer didn't care. He wanted the tank abandoned. So right where that fill pipe is, we dug down to the top of the tank. This was actually a 1,500-gallon tank, so it went from curb to sidewalk. And we dug a hole at where the fill pipe is and dug a hole in between the AC unit and that bush to the top of the tank. You cut it open, clean it out so it's a clean steel shell, cut 2 panels in the bottom of the tank, pull up soil from the bottom of the tank. We have an on-site Petroflag kit. We'll test that for any types of petroleum impacts in the soil. If there's none present, then we fill it. We use a tripolymer foam, which hardens to a 10 psi. If it was a structural situation where half the tank was under the footing and just the fill neck was sticking out, then we would use a concrete slurry to abandon that tank.
So what do you mean by hardship? As far as
Like the one I've seen, this old Italian guy had a tank underneath a humongous fountain, and to take that fountain down and rebuild it would have been 30 times the cost of what we were doing. So in that situation is okay. Underneath a foundation, underneath Bilco doors, anything where basically it's going to cost the homeowner way more money than the removal itself, then that's the route of an abandonment you want to go. But sometimes, like when it comes to home sales, the existing homeowner doesn't care. Even though I went in the tank, cleaned it all out, we soil samples came back good. We filled the tank up with the inert material. They still don't want. They still want the tank out. So I've also had customers that paid for an abandonment and then had to remove the tank. So that's why it's always suggested to remove the tank. An abandonment is only those situations where there's no machine access. A lot of Candlewood Lake stuff. I don't know if you guys go out there, but you know, a lot of that there's zero machine access. You can't even get into these neighborhoods with a oil truck, barely maneuver with an oil truck, let alone truck, trailer, and machinery. So
are there laws commercial versus residential in our state?
The laws are very similar. Commercial is just a higher, so 2,200 parts per million is the soil sample for a commercial. 500 parts per million is the soil sample for residential. That's what it deems it leaking or not. So if it comes back commercially at 2,000 parts per million, that customer is pretty much good to go. If it comes back at 5,000 parts per million, then he would have to clean up the site before the property transfers hands.
There's no law saying, I mean, can you still bury a tank if you had to, if
Yes.
you wanted to?
No, you can still bury a tank. The cost is astronomically more than a standard install. It's always best to pull the tank out of the ground and either put it up, outside. The way I always usually go is replace the tank, put it in the basement. If there's no room in the basement, then you go in the garage. If there's no room in the garage or the house is on slab, then I'll go somewhere near the boiler outside on a concrete pad.
Somebody told me once,
Jack, humongous home and everything's finished down there, then yes, that's when the people, like a lot of these, 8 to 10,000, square foot homes in, Fairfield County, we usually, I work them up for a fiberglass tank, and there's just a lot to do with that.
Somebody told me that a commercial, Jack, the law, and at least in our state, is if it's buried, it has to be removed. But residential, is that not the case? I mean, you can actually abandon, like you said, and leave it in.
Yeah, you can abandon commercial too. It just depends on the situation. I did a job in Meriden where the tank was buried in between. They put an addition on a building right over the top of the tank, and the guy was upset that the building looked like it was splitting from the other. And so they did some research and found out the tank that was underneath there, they didn't fill it up all the way. So the top of the tank was rotting away because of the weight of the building and everything, and it started to separate. So somebody went in there and started to jack the side of the house up, and then we had to fill that tank up with a concrete slurry.
Jack, I'm just going to interrupt here because you're doing a great job. I'm going to skim along a couple of these things. If you're watching this as a pre-recorded event, there's some narratives here, but the people watching it, I'm not going to go through all these, but there's general descriptions that you can do, minor corrosion. One of the things here, it says the tank is supported by non-standard wooden blocks. So, Jack, do you see that a lot?
Yeah, you'll see a lot of the old school guys would stick. They like to shove 4x4s underneath there, make like a little crib action, and if the legs are rusted, it's good for a temporary on your end.
Gotcha. So here's some narratives that you can. This will be put up on the site. So if you need to come back and look at these narratives, you can. Communicating with real estate professionals. you want to be clear, concise. It's basically the same. You guys know what to do on that. The same thing that you're going to do with your clients, you're going to do with a real estate professional. A lot of times, too, I had an agent one time just completely freak out, especially when times are very slow for them. You walk up, the people looked at the house, they love the house, and now there's an underground oil tank. And I had an agent have a meltdown. And you've got to know how to handle those situations by, just being calm and just communicating correctly. Jack, would you like to comment on underground tank detection methods?
Okay, so we also Absolute Tank Removal has a sister company, Absolute Tank Testing. So, like I told you before, with the 2-box magnetometer, I do that just as a standard look at, but we also go out there and do tank searches where if, guys like yourselves believe there might be a tank, or another company went out there, said there might be a tank, then we would go out there and mark it out. So the GPR, I don't use GPR. I do use GPR, but that's only when I know there's some utilities around the tank and where I'm excavating. So if call before you dig marked out something that I believe is in my tank area, I'll hire a GPR company and they'll go out there with the ground penetrating radar. And you can see on their screen right now, those high circles, those are the metal anomaly, kind of showing you the top of the tank. That, I believe, would be a 2,000-gallon tank based on that. But that is one thing. And then what we'll do too is we also send soil samples right down the side. So we'll take a solid metal rod, drive that into the ground 18 inches below the bottom of the tank. And then what you see on that picture right there is a sample bale. Once you drive a hole into the ground, then you push that sample bale down and then pull it back up. Once you pull it back up, then you can open it up, and inside is a plastic sleeve, and then you can take samples from different depths. A lot of times they have skid mounted machines that go out there and drive it into the ground for you. So that's all done. Let's just say no tank was found or anything, and the customer wanted samples done around the area where it might have been at one time. That's one way to do it. Sometimes people want to do soil samples around the existing underground tank. Usually doesn't fly as far as home sales are concerned. Usually they still have to get that tank out. But sometimes in cash, take it as is situations, people will go in there, do soil borings around the outside of the tank, which doesn't satisfy anything with the state or the deep, because they want to know what's going on underneath the bottom of the tank. And being there's no rod that can go down and then under the tank to sample, this is only going down on the outskirts of the tank. But it'll also let you know if there was a petroleum release that moved east, west, north, or south. Doesn't detect anything towards the bottom, but it would let it know if it seeped out. That situation usually gives you false positives, especially like in a clay situation where that oil stays right where the leak is and kind of travels straight down. Or super sandy situations do that as well. So,
Jack, when you remove a tank and you take the soil sample, and let's say there's oil, how far down do you have to dig again and take another sample?
Well, once we know, we only take a sample 18 inches below the tank bottom when we're removing the tank. When you do a remediation, let's say, okay, everything's set, we were hired to go back there and do the remediation. You have to dig northwest, south, east, and bottom until you have clean samples. Max depth 15 feet.
Okay.
Or if you hit groundwater, then you got to take a groundwater sample, and then you got to put you got to get an LEP involved, which is a licensed environmental professional. You got to get him involved, and then he would go out there and treat the groundwater through a series of different piping and different chemicals and stuff.
So when you say
here's some information.
500 parts.
I'm sorry, Scott. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. 500 parts. If you have to keep digging and you come up with a sample around 500, if maybe everything else is good, that's good. Correct.
I keep digging until I'm under 100 once I'm out there, because I have an on-site PetroFlag kit. It tests the soil. It's not good enough to give the customer a closure report, but it's good enough in the field for me to know to stop digging and keep digging. So if my test comes back in the neighborhood of 100, I'm good. Then I know when it comes back from the lab, it'll be usually a little bit higher, but not terrible, where he's still below 500. But when you're doing these things, and a new homeowner coming in, they don't want to see any numbers. They want that to be
Right.
zero, and they don't want to care that it's. They're like, but there's still presence of petroleum impacts in the soil, and my response is yes, but it's below the state criteria. And then I've seen people walk away from that, or the guy had me come back out and dig it until I was at zero.
So when you're passive venting, is you just can't go any deeper for whatever
Yeah,
reason.
once you start to impede footings, like when you get down there and now you're almost below that footing, I'll fill that hole in with crushed stone and bring put a network of slotted pipe on the bottom and bring an inlet and an outlet above grade and candy cane them off.
So, Jack, you sent me this information. I think we've gone over it, tank removal versus abandonment. I think you've touched on all these subjects here.
Yeah, this is pretty much exactly what is it. Yeah, I sent you a tidbit out of our proposal. So this is exactly what the customer would receive from Absolute Tank if it was a hardship.
Gotcha. And do you know anything about insurance considerations for oil tanks? Does standard homeowners?
There is a couple of companies out there that do it, but they're money hungry, so I don't get involved with that. They, everybody, if we want to pull their oil tanks, we have to give them X amount of dollars a year. So, and if the customer says they like, for example, ProGuard is one of the insurances out there. We're not a licensed vendor for ProGuard because not a lot of people have it, and the amount of money you got to spend a year to do their work isn't worth it. So we've gone away from that. Now it's just ProGuard is still there, and I think there's 2 other oil tank insurance companies, but from what I hear from the customers, they're really not great as far as covering everything.
Gotcha. So basically, working with specialized tank contractors, you have to be credentialed.
Yep.
You have to have insurance.
Yeah.
There you go. Let's see
Yep,
what we got here.
all that is correct. So those are the.
I've seen these guys that have, they have a backhoe and stuff, and I'm sure you've dealt with them before, and they probably botch this joint. Do you deal with that a lot in our state where guys, Joe
Schmo with the backhoe. They'll have their uncle out there pull the tank out, and then they're like, "Yeah, the tank was over here. Can you guys just come over and sample?" I walk away from that work, especially if I gave them a proposal already, and then they turn around, they try to go to any of the labs that we use, like Quest or York, or any of the labs that we use for soil analysis. They'll try to bring it there and say they're on behalf of Absolute Tank, and then they know that's false. That's happened to us as well. So anytime a customer starts to work on their tank, we walk away from that.
Is Connecticut similar to Mass, Rhode Island, some of the other states as far as removing tanks and the laws?
Yep, Connecticut, New York, Mass, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, and I think Maine is Vermont, they're on their own schedule. I don't know. I don't think they even really care, to be honest with you. But I know a lot of the surrounding states is exactly very similar, same parts per million to deem it leaking and not. Same codes as far as plumbing and piping and everything like that. But these tanks right here, what I'm switching to, these Roth tanks. This is a tandem installation of a Roth, and this is what I'm trying to recommend my customers do. There's that white tag right on the front there. That's what'll tell you guys your dates, and just know that the Roth tanks are 30-year, and you can note the date. And there's a little leak detection. If you look on the first tank here on the top right of that first tank, you'll see a little clear sight. Now, if you go the first tank to your left, go up top, you see that little green and clear. Nope.
Oh, right there.
So that right there is your interstitial gauge. So if that thing has a red fail in there, that means the primary tank is leaked into the secondary tank, and the customer should replace that. If it is a clear sight glass, that means the tank's doing well, and the age of the tank should be labeled right on the front.
You like these tanks?
I hate installing them because it's a flimsy piece of shit, but I'll tell you what, as far as what these guys are, you got to be an octopus to plumb the thing, because you need like 3 wrenches, because every time you go to turn it, it's, you're screwing into plastic and aluminum. So it's kind of hard. It's a pain in the ass, but once all said and done, it is really a nice tank.
How do they compare cost-wise to your
So,
traditional
well,
tank?
Yeah, just like I said earlier, that right now that raw tank and a Granby standard 3-year steel tank that you guys see in basements as well, same price. It's about roughly my cost is somewhere in the neighborhood of $1,000 for a 275. When I first started, they used to be $200. So these things have gone up crazy.
And retail?
Oh, like for me to standardly swap
What's up?
out a tank is somewhere in the neighborhood of $4,000. That's to
Oof.
remove the old one, install the new one, because these tanks also require what's called an OSV, an online safety valve, and a Tiger Loop, which is a line deaerator. That's Roth's manufacturer. So that makes this tank install like $500 more than your standard Granby, because your standard Granby tank, I can come off the bottom with a filter, safety valve, run the single line to the furnace. It's done.
And that's what, about 3 to 3,500.
Yeah, anywhere between 30. If a customer said how much these things run, you guys can know if it's a standard swap out, pulling a tank out of the basement and putting another one in. You can always use neighborhood numbers from 35 to $4,000. But it also, if they got 4 units down there, now I need 4 Tiger Loops and 4 safety valves. So, like I told Jim earlier in an email, like you guys should always stay away from pricing and just refer them to us. But if you had to give them a neighborhood number, a friendly guy, you're just, around $4,000. So,
Can you talk about some of the monitoring that they have now?
okay, so like the most common, so the what is that? The Beckett is they got a smart app. So basically, what that is just like a little. So it would be more like similar to the one on your right. These are all situations of underground tanks in a commercial application. All these leak detections are for underground tanks, more in commercial. So the standard one you probably always see is Veeder-Root. That right there, if you wanted to even take a look at how the tank's going, you can go to the Veeder-Root and print out the most recent information. It'll give you tank size, diameter, give you temperature. It'll let you know if there's been any alarms going off in the interstitial, because the oil line should be monitored, the tank should be monitored, the interstitial should be monitored. It also gives you liquid leveling. It'll give you the ullage space. It basically gives you anything you need to know about the tank. But they also have ones for homeowners where the Beckett has a decent one where you screw it into the top, connect it to your Wi-Fi, then your liquid level goes onto your phone. So let's just say the people who are away on vacation, they need to fill up. They can look at the app on their phone, tell them to fill it up. If they notice that they just filled up and now they have no oil, obviously they got a leak. So then they can send somebody over there. There's also pans that you can put underneath the bottom of the tanks that have float switches in it, and that can also go to this sensor, which will go to your phone wirelessly.
If you're viewing this as a recorded event, here's your second code, OT6843. They must be provided for you to get a certificate. Best practices for new tank installations. Jack, I'll hand it over. Pre-installation planning.
I don't know. Don't
Go ahead.
pre-installation. Stay upstairs while I'm working. I don't know.
Okay. Foundation preparation.
It's kind of hard to do all that stuff. So let's just say there was a situation where there was a crack in the foundation that was behind the oil tank. I would go in, transfer that fuel out of that tank to a temporary tank. If the tank is like brand new, I'll slide it out of the way. The guys will go and do their thing, and then I'll come back and reinstall it. If the tank is, old and decrepit, then we'll cut clean, remove that tank, and then whenever they fix the basement, I'll go in there and reinstall it. But it's kind of hard, like tell people move the tank to paint the foundation wall. I'm in and out of there in 5 hours. So
Gotcha.
I'm not going to wait for somebody to go down there with a roller. I mean, if it's an old timer, I always hook them up just to be nice. I'll let him go down there with he got his paint clothes on, go paint the wall. That's fine. Then I'll slide the tank in. I try to stay away from that.
For tanks outside, they have to have a concrete pad.
Here's the crazy thing. So when I was doing these raw tanks, I would put some blocks down and put it on block. I would level the area off, put crushed stone down. I put the blocks, and then I failed an inspection. The guy had a representative from Roth out there. So the Roth tanks that you saw earlier, 2 things are allowed with that is they'll allow you to put just crushed stone on the ground. That tank can sit right on a crushed stone or a concrete pad. They don't want it to be on concrete blocks though. Why? I don't know, but whatever.
What about a Granby tank?
Granby
Pad?
tanks should be on a concrete pad. So if you see that on 4 old blocks or bricks or just something leaning on the edge, the whole tank is itself leaning against the house, that's a fail. Recommend, replacement. If it's on a concrete pad, that's fine. The tank should be UL 80 and UL 142. So UL 142 is like for like gasoline tanks, but it's also for an oil tank to be outside. If it's a UL 80 tank, it should be painted with some type of Rust-Oleum.
What about a cover? Can they be uncovered or shed?
They could be uncovered. I always recommend the
Or
customers to
tub?
cover it.
Or
There
those
should be a
tubs?
shed around it, something around it. They sell tank tubs for the Granby, and the Roth is actually nice. It has its own roof on the top for outside.
Jack,
Go ahead,
okay.
Scott. Sorry.
Just to kind of go back, tank in a basement near we see them all the time near old floor drains, open sump pumps. I mean, I know there's a company out there. What is your thoughts on that? Do you recommend anything underneath?
Double wall. If that's the only place for it to go, and that's what I'm dealing with, then the only thing I would do is Granby sells a double bottom tank, or I would tell them to go with the Roth tank. That's a double wall tank. Something that has some type of
those containment pans, are they any good?
Yeah, they're okay until they overflow and go into sump.
Kind of like the hot water heater ones with no drainage.
Exactly. That's the same thing they sell for oil tanks. But in order to put some of those pans in, you got to remove the oil out of the tank, remove the piping, lift the tank up, and then it sits inside of it. That's why I recommend like the double bottom tanks that Granby have. They are that has leak detection. So if there's a sump that this tank's going to be within 18 inches, somewhere close 3 feet by, even in the same wall as it, I would definitely recommend them to have a double wall tank, some type of leak detection, so they are alerted before it goes in the sump and gets pumped out into the yard.
What about mechanical patches? What's your thoughts on that? Because I still
if you see them out there, then that's a recommend replacement. So a magnet patch is the only one that I use. It's basically a rubber grommet glued to a magnet, and you kind of put the rubber grommet in where the leak is, and then just keep wiggling it, and then the magnet will adhere to the tank, and it does seem to stop. But once that's on there, that means the tank needs to be replaced anyways. If you see any type of fiberglass patching on the bottom of the tank, definitely recommend replacement as well, because those are the ones. Very seldom do tanks just let go in the basement. But if they do, it is a fiberglass patch tank.
Decommissioning abandoned tanks. You'll do an initial assessment, then you got to remove everything inside, the oil, then you have to clean the tank?
Yeah, then you would clean the inside of the tank. I just got to either pressure wash it, and then we have our vac hose in there, which sucks out all the liquid. Once that's clean steel or as good as I can get it, I hop into the bottom with a fresh air hood on, and I'll cut a sample hole in the bottom of the tank with a grinder on either end of the tank. And then I'll pull up soil from there, jump out of the tank, test it. If everything's good, we use a tripolymer foam. We fill the tank up with a tripolymer foam. That hardens to a 10 PSI and we're done. Like I said, structural situations, it would be filled with concrete.
What about pipes and walls when you go up to these houses?
I try not to dig up more. I try not to dig up more than I can. So if we did an install and a removal, I'll blow the lines back to the tank in the ground because we do the install first. So I'll blow the lines back from the boilers back to the tank so they're clean. So when the operator goes to pull on them outside, nothing starts spraying and going everywhere. So if we are there's 2 or 3 towns, I know Southington is one of them. You have to remove the oil lines right to the foundation wall, and then they want you to put some water plug on it. If I'm doing a tank in the basement, once I blow them back, I'll snap the lines off at the wall or I'll crimp them, and then I'll put like a little bit of concrete over the top of it so they don't get no water in there. And then we'll do the same on the outside if applicable. Like if it's tanks in one spot and this thing goes under 7 AC units and then goes inside the building where I'm going to cut it in the excavation because I already blew it back and we're done there.
So there isn't any standard for the interior lines, because I used to always think that if I saw it crimped off near the wall, that that was probably removed. I obviously don't assume that. I still recommend evaluation and documentation, but there is no set standard for what to do with the interior lines.
They want them cut as close as you can to the wall, and as long as it's not leaking any product or leaking water from the outside. If you, I've done jobs where I've ripped it out, so, concreted the inside, and then the customer calls, so I got a little water in my basement, and sure as shit, it came right where the oil lines were. Then I gotta chip it out and do a better job patching it. But standardly in the industry, it's to blow them back, bang them flat at the wall, give it cut it with a pair of snips, give it 3 bends, and then smack it flat. And usually that's good. If you notice like it coming through the wall, and as you're hammering it flat, you crack some of the concrete, I'll chip out a little more and just mortar it.
So is it safe to say that if you do see, like I did one the other day, that I didn't see the documentation, but supposedly the homeowner had documentation that had been removed, but there was still both the lines, the shutoff valve, everything's still inside.
I would say
Is it-
recommend further investigation on the
Right.
product lines unless they
Yeah.
can supply you with documentation as a cover your ass type of situation.
Sure, yeah, I always do. Yeah, I just didn't know if that was an indication that maybe it was done by Joe Schmo with a backhoe, as you described.
Right. Yeah. You never know. That's why I would just definitely say if it looked, if they tell you, hey, listen, I had an underground tank, it was properly removed, but now you go in there and you see these lines, I would say, hey, listen, I would still, as far as you're concerned, I would say I recommend further investigation. And then if the customer supplies you with a closure report, then I would say it's safe to say you're all set.
Cool. Thank you.
Here's some.
Jack.
Go ahead, Scott. Sorry.
Real quick, Jack. I see this all the time. Not from you guys, because you remove the tank from the basement, the fill in the vent are cut, and they're left outside.
That's illegal. You can't do that.
It's actually illegal.
It's actually illegal, because if that oil man doesn't know, what if he goes over there and lets it fly? Now that basement's all full of oil. It's just gonna come shooting there. You have to remove any visible piping. So like if the oil line, like when let's say it's a standard, we call it AST, above ground storage tank. So if it's a standard AST removal, we'll go in there, we'll cut the tank open, we'll clean it out, then we'll cut the piping off, remove the tank, whether we got to cut it in pieces, whatever we got to do to get it out of the house. Wherever the copper lines go, if they're above ground and go to the furnace and they got a little berm of concrete, we'll rip that out too. If it's underneath like a bunch of stuff under the floor, like I said, we'll take our vacuum. In that situation, we'll take our vacuum truck and vacuum out those lines and then bang them flat on either end. And then we'll remove the tank. Then we'll try to, let's say the tank, the piping went through a fieldstone foundation. We're trying to bang this piping out. We can't get it out. I'll cut it flush on the outside. I'll cut it flush on the inside, and then we'll fill the pipe up with concrete. You can't leave that piping on the outside. Now, if somebody wants to put a cap on it, so it's just like 2 caps sticking out there, there's nothing illegal about that. But if there's still a fill box on the outside of that, and there's no tank on the inside, and the piping's just cut, that's a big issue. That's something that you would recommend to your client to take care of.
30 years ago, that happened to my uncle. He had went to natural gas. They had the oil lines. The oil company wasn't notified. They moved the tank, but the lines were still there, and it filled the basement with a lot of oil.
Well, technically, the driver shouldn't be filling unless he hears a whistle. So if he kept on him too,
and it was a nightmare because they had it got into the cement and went into the ground. They had to jack the whole floor out.
Nice.
I'm gonna go through a couple of these slides. I pulled up some information, and then we'll take some questions because we got about 5-6 minutes left. I pulled up from some information I found online on insurance claims data from Connecticut over the past year, where these failures come from, and there's a percentage here of internal corrosion, external corrosion, installation defects, physical damage, manufacturing defects, and then they have a list there of other causes. So this is it looks like internal corrosion is your big problem, or just corrosion, in fact, is most of your problems.
Yeah, sure is.
Now, Jack, do you work with local fire marshals?
Yeah, I got a couple that I'm actually personally friends with. Yep.
Okay. And seasonal maintenance considerations, winter considerations,
Maybe a
Any-
little additive for the winter, but usually the oil companies all have that additive in there now. That's the reason why these tanks are all leaking. But um, annual maintenance, they sell some stuff, that you could put in there to help treat the sludge. I stay away from any type of other people's gimmick and just stick to what I do. I don't like recommending something because then if something happens and it comes back to me, you told me to do this. Now look at my tank. So I just kind of tell the people that your oil company will take care of you on that.
There's some industry resources for home inspectors. Obviously, your professional organizations like us, technical resources, the National Oil Heat Research Alliance, regulatory guidance from DEEP, and several kind of digital tools for inspecting oil tanks. Specialized equipment for enhanced inspections, ultrasonic thickness gauge, infrared cameras, moisture meters. We have some of these information. I don't know about a thickness gauge.
Yeah, those are all gimmicks.
And then final thoughts. And then basically you can read this, the professional development. You want to keep up to date. Always detail your work and language clearly. You want to develop a professional network, which you are doing here. And again, clear communication. Be really clear with your client. So I'm just going to hand it out to Scott and Jack. If you have any questions from anybody, we got about 5 more minutes and then we'll wrap up.
Everybody else has got a couple. I just got a couple for you, Jack. When you pull these tanks, is it just the fire marshal's office or does the building department aware of these tank removals?
Some towns, the building department handles the removal and the installation. For the most part, it's building inspector for the installation, fire marshal for the removal or abandonment. Either way, unfortunately, we've been doing this a while, so some of the fire marshals don't come out. They're like, all right, we know you, take a picture and send it to us. They're just being lazy. They just want the money for the permit, and that's it. That's happened as well, too. So,
what about age? Age of buried versus above ground, ballpark, life expectancy.
25 years.
For both?
For both, roughly 25 years. So if you see a tank from 2000, so all the tanks that I've installing, I've pulled out. I'm starting to pull out. I've also pulled a tank out the other day that I've installed 3 years ago. The biodiesel literally ripped a hole right through the bottom of the tank. It's crazy.
Anything like we go to these houses now, it's converted. Like my house, I went to gas, propane. Is there anything that we as inspectors, once we go into these houses, that can say, hey, there might have been a tank here somewhere, and it might have been above ground versus below ground? Anything that we can kind of just see right away or give us an
holes
indication?
in the, 2 holes in the going through a foundation or through a sill plate. 2 circular holes, remnants of copper near the old boiler, staining near the old boiler from a copper line. Pretty much it as far as an above ground tank. If it was in the basement, if you see 2 circles, through the foundation that's been patched or through a sill plate, you see different wood on the outside or something or like sometimes people trimmed out the vent with the siding. And you'll still see a random trimmed out area, but no tank. That means there was an oil tank and piping went through over there as well.
Or round stains on the floor,
Yeah, or if you're getting that critical, if they didn't paint the floor, you'll see the rust marks from the legs.
Jack, do you guys cover the whole state of Connecticut?
We don't do the top right corner. Everywhere else we go, though.
New York?
No New York, no Mass, no Rhode Island. We did away with that. New York was like shaking us down for money. White Plains was ridiculous to work with.
And we have some guys on here from other states. Is there, if they, maybe I'm sure the agents out there and I know Mike and all that. Is there anybody that you guys know in other states that if customers reach out?
Not again. Back to what I said about even talking about additives with the customer. I don't put my name on anything unless I'm doing it.
The one we're going to wrap up here, but the one thing I'm really gleaming from this that I had no idea, because we had actually had a webinar on this, was the biofuels, and that industry is all hyped up, ready to go when the oil runs out. And you're telling me that's not really going to be a great thing for oil tanks.
It will. We just have to evolve in that direction. Like I said, the raw tank is the evolution towards not having to deal with that, but not good for Granby and places like that. But there is.
Are those manufacturers, is like Granby addressing that now with like some kind of inner
I don't know
bladder?
what type of internal coating they could put on the steel before they weld it and bend it. Right now, their answer is just a double bottom. So Granby has the double bottom, and Granby also has the 2-in-1 tank as well, which is the same as Roth. But I personally don't use those. I use the Roth.
Okay. Well, this was very informative, Jack. I want to thank you for your time.
No problem.
The information was great. We're going to put your information up on our website. So if any of our inspectors need to recommend you for any of this kind of work, they will reach out to you.
Yeah, please do so.
We will.
Especially in
Thank you.
Connecticut.
Yes. Thank you so much.
All
Thank
right.
you.